So I'm going to talk about the future of social norms. And I'll tell you a little bit about what social norms are and what the interventions that have been being used with young people around social norming. It's probably the most ubiquitous type of intervention that's out there for college students and young adults and adolescents. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the future, where we're going with it. So first off, the problem. Risky drinking among US college students. You've heard a little bit about it in the first talk, which was just fantastic. So hopefully we'll continue that trend here. Here's a look, snapshot at college student drinking. And what I want you to see first off is that basically when it comes to binge drinking, which is defined as 4 or more drinks in a row for a woman in a 2-hour period, or 5 or more drinks for a man in a 2-hour period, basically 24% of college students report binge drinking at least once in the last 2 weeks. This is last 2-week data. So at least once in the last 2 weeks. 10% of college student respondents report what we call extreme drinking. And we're very interested in extreme drinking nowadays with college student research. We've moved away from binge drinking and into extreme drinking. 10 or more drinks in an evening. 10 or more drinks in an evening. The reason why we're really interested in that is because since I've started doing this research about 20 years ago, the biggest qualitative change I've seen when you give students measures of what are your motives for drinking, what kind of things, what are your reasons for drinking, the number one endorsed item has changed. It used to be social, to have fun with my friends. The number one endorsed item now, endorsed by anywhere between 1/4 to 1/3 of students, is to pass out, to black out, to get high. So there's a qualitative change in the drinking that's happened in the last 20 years. I mean, it's somewhat similar. It's kind of like what we remember when we were in college, if you can remember that far back, and all of that. But there is this qualitative difference, and that's why there's been a renewed focus on extreme drinking. And then finally, 4% of the participants have reported drinking 15 or more drinks in the last 2 weeks. And this is from a big multi-site national data set. It's in the news. Timothy Piazza, a 19-year-old pledge at Penn State, was killed. I'm sure you've all seen that story. Last week, 4 of his fraternity brothers pled guilty to charges related to his death. And more than that, you've got Noah here on the left from UCI, 18 years old. He died after going to a frat party. His blood alcohol content, 0.331. 0.331. Up on the right, Colin Waite. Colin is a student at Ohio University. He too died this spring. These are all deaths this spring. He too died this spring from frat party hazing incident. So Ohio U is going through all of that right now. And then finally on the bottom is Connor Gage. Connor is a 19-year-old at the University of Vermont, who we just heard about, UVM. He went to 2 frat parties on a night, was walking home after his party in one of these Arctic chill events that you people tend to have out here on the East Coast, and we don't in Los Angeles. But if we get fires, and that's about it. But he was walking home on a cold evening, tried to take a shortcut, got caught up by a fence, ended up passing out, and froze to death. Blood alcohol over 0.20. So these are all instances of things that have happened just this year. And it shows you why it's important to focus on this extreme drinking and this kind of problematic drinking among college students. 3 million plus college students drive after having something to drink, drive under the influence every year. That's after years and years of informational programs and interventions aimed to stop drinking and driving, ride services now that they can use and so on, but there's still 3 million per year. Also, 696,000 students or 700,000 students are physically assaulted. About 100,000 students experience a sexual assault either by someone under the influence or while they were under the influence. And there's roughly 1,900 deaths a year. I just highlighted 3 of them from this year that are related to alcohol. I had a kid who when I was training to be a Catholic priest, I was taught at a high school, a Jesuit high school. I was a Jesuit priest, and I had a kid who I loved who went to Villanova. He was on the team I coached, the cross-country team, really great kid, a really nice family. He got drunk at a first-year party, was walking home across, there's whatever the train is called in Philadelphia, the subway kind of train. Anybody from Philly know what it's called? Sorry? The SEPTA or something like that. He was walking across some tracks and he fell off them and died. Blood alcohol above 0.20. So these are the kinds of things that happen. I want to say when I was first getting my degree, one of the things I wanted to see, I was very interested in expectancies, the expectancies people had when they were drinking, and how your expectancies might change when you drink. You know, that you might, when you start drinking, you start feeling that alcohol is going to do more positive things for you, and then that will fuel more drinking in an evening. That was one of my hypotheses. But to do that, I'd have to kind of work with people when they were drinking, and no one wants to do research like that because it's so onerous. You have to bring them into a lab, and you got to sign them a release, and you have to sit with them for 6 hours till their blood alcohol goes down, and all this stuff that makes it complicated. But I did conduct a study where we interviewed people when they were coming back onto campus between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., where we asked them to blow in a breathalyzer. And they didn't get to see the results, nor did we. They went to a machine in our laboratory, and then we asked them to fill out how much they thought they drank, how much, what they thought their BAC was, and a measure on their expectancies. I was really interested in this expectancy thing, and then we sent them a follow-up survey when they were sober in the middle of the week and asked them to report how much they had drank that night and also what their expectancies were now. Well, true enough, the higher their BAC was, the more positive their expectancies for alcohol were compared to what they were when they were sober. So that was true. But what shocked me and what keeps me propelled in this research was that of those 450 kids that they had to have reported that they had had at least one drink that night to become part of this study. There was no incentive either. I mean, it was, you know, that we didn't pay them or anything. But for the 450 kids, about a third of them had BACs between 0 and 0.08. About a third of them had BACs between 0.08 and 0.16. Now that's almost double the legal limit, right? And about a third of them had BACs above 0.16. Now we're talking about a really serious range for very serious consequences. And I was shocked to think that that would be the BACs of people when they were returning to campus. So this is a serious issue, even though it seems like it's only college students and so on. Okay, so social norms theory is this idea, and it starts with this idea that students overestimate the peer drinking. They overestimate the drinking of their other students. And this is how the theory goes, that these types of overestimations that students make are typically broken down into 2 main categories. Descriptive norms. Descriptive norms are the how much everybody else is drinking. And then injunctive norms, which are more about attitudes, how approving everybody else is drinking. And what we do know is that college students always overestimate how much everybody else is drinking, and they always overestimate how approving all the other college students are of drinking. Why is that? Well, it's true for all of us in general. We tend to overestimate unhealthy norms, and we tend to underestimate healthy norms. There's a whole research over many years now that shows that for adults and young adults and college students with respect to healthy and unhealthy behaviors, and that we overestimate unhealthy behaviors, underestimate healthy behaviors. The reason is because when we're doing our and this is all unconscious, but when we're trying to figure out what the norm is for a group, what do we notice? We notice often the things that stand out. We don't notice the background, we notice what moves into the foreground, or as when I'm working with college students on a Friday morning, because Thursday night's a big party night at LMU. I wonder if it is here as well. But on a Friday morning, when you're in line to get breakfast, you don't hear somebody saying, oh, dude, I had such a great night. I was in the library till 2 a.m. I finished 2 term projects, and then we went back and we had hot chocolate or whatever, you know. No, what you hear is that, did you see so-and-so passed out in the bushes in front of the dorm? Or that person, sorry, I was going to say a bad word, but you know, that person urinated on themselves and was laying in the door on the floor. That's what you hear, and then that becomes the norm, because that's what you hear about, and that's what you see, and that's who's making noise, and so on. So the 30% of people that don't drink at all in college, and there are 25 to 30% who don't do any drinking, they don't get noticed at all. And what becomes the norm are these people doing the extreme drinking, so it promotes unconsciously students to think everybody's doing that kind of behavior. In any event, when you take all the risk factors for heavy drinking in college students and put them into like a horse race, a regression where you're analyzing all of them at the same time to see which predicts the most unique variance in college student drinking, the winner always is descriptive norms. So whether you're in a frat or not, whether you're males drink more than females, whether you have high motives for coping or social motives or positive expectancies or negative expectancies, no matter what kind of the predictor is, descriptive norms always wins out, and it explains a very big chunk of the unique variance in how much a student drinks. So the best predictor of how much someone drinks is how much they think everybody else is drinking. And so this is where our social norms theory comes in. It tries to re-norm people's ideas around the real norm. So overestimating pure drinking leads students to drink more themselves in order to fit in. So there we go. So the most common brief intervention for young adults or college students is what's called personalized normative feedback. It's a way of correcting overestimated norms or misperceived norms. And it is consistently shown to be effective, and it's used at most colleges around the country, some form of it. Some either a poster campaign or pop-ups on tables in the cafeterias or online interventions or come in and talk to somebody intervention. But it looks like this. Here's a question. What percentage of incoming college students reported drinking the last year indicated that they were either drinking about, ready to, or currently trying to drink alcohol in a safer way? And you thought 50%, the actual was 34%. That's from Alcohol EDU. That doesn't really work, actually. I don't know why that slide is in there. But because that's not helping. That's a bad norm to project, because if you thought 50% were doing it, and then you're told only 34%, you're going to be less likely to do it. So typically you give them a norm where it says, you said everybody's drinking 8 drinks per night. You said you drink 7 drinks per night. We interviewed 3,000 college students, and the average drinks per night for a typical male was 4.1 or 3.4. So you say that you think it's 8, but it's really 3.4. You're drinking 7. It's tied to what it thinks. And then students are allowed to kind of reflectively think about that. So there's no telling them that they have to drink at the norm. It's just kind of natural that we want to fit in. We want to kind of adapt our behavior to what's the norm. Most successful, I think all successful things that have been approved by NIAAA as successful brief interventions for college students include a social norms component. But there's also a ton of research on just social norms, personalized normative feedback as an intervention in itself that shows that it's effective. The problem with it that I've seen over the years, and I've done this for many years, has been that the effects are relatively small. Despite some success, radical change has not come. We've really we're really dealing with an intractable problem that, as you saw in Noah and Colin and Connor and so many others, has really dire consequences for people every year. Here are some of the big issues I see with this, and this is, our lab has tried to negotiate these big issues. The first is reactance. When people think you are trying to get them to change, they resist change. When they think you're challenging them about their drinking, they get defensive about their drinking. That's just very typical about what happens. And so you want to design, we thought personalized normative feedback was a self-confrontation, non-defensive. Here's what everybody's doing. Here's what you think everybody's doing. Here's what you're doing. And here's what everybody's doing. Here's what everybody's doing. So you're a self-confrontation with the data. But still, if you're targeting them in some way for the intervention because they were written up or because they are, part of a fraternity and they think the thing is about alcohol, they typically tend to get reactive. The second thing is that generally the data about what the norm is comes from general stats, and often these general stats aren't personally relevant to the person who's being intervened with. And it's very, very funny when you do this with college students. They might be C students, but as soon as you give them the data that, on average, with this data set of 3,000 college students, the average male drinks only 3.4 drinks. All of a sudden, they're straight A students in research methods. It's amazing. Well, did you interview the drinkers? I mean, no drinkers would participate in this study. You only interviewed the non-drinkers. And they give you all these reasons why they should discount the norms. They become experts in methodology and why they shouldn't believe the actual number you're giving them. And then the third reason is that they often don't believe the statistics because they don't jibe with what they're seeing on social media. Well, this was a reason we thought we had, but we just are finishing up a grant where we got 600 incoming first-year students to give us their Facebook logins, their Instagram logins, and their Finstagram logins. Are you familiar with Finstagrams? So some of you are. It's a fake Instagram that you only have for your closest group of friends, where you can post your unglamorous self, because Instagram is where you post your glamorous self. So they gave us their logins. We created a computer-generated thing which logged into their accounts every day for a month before they got to, first off, when my team came to me and said, let's do this social media grant, I'm like, there's no way anybody's going to give up their passwords. Well, little did I know, half of our incoming class was able to give up their passwords for $20. But in any event, this tells you a bit about what privacy means to people who are 18, 19, 20 years old. And so what we told them, we're not going to look at what you post. We're only going to capture what's in your news feed. We're going to then, we then blotted out the faces and took out any names. And then we created machine learning software to analyze it. Well, actually, I'm beginning to think this might not be as powerful an influence as I thought it was, because roughly only about 1.5 to 6% of the images in people's news feeds have to deal with partying, alcohol, and so on. I was thinking it might be a lot more for a college student based on other stuff that we had done and people's self-reports and so on. But again, social media does have a role to play here. And then finally, if people are kind of forced to participate, like through a program before they get to college, like Alcohol EDU or Think About It or some of these other programs, it might make them dislike the content or not be too interested in the content. So a brief course in the history of research, it's not linear. It doesn't go in a linear direction. Sometimes there are big bumps in the research, and then sometimes there are places where it plateaus out. And in a sense, there was a lot of resources pumped into college student drinking and understanding it and trying to intervene with it in the early 2000s. And we've kind of reached a plateau in a bit. We haven't had anything that creative or anything that's taken us to the next level since. The same things we learned in the early 2000s are the things people are just toying around the edges with now. So Danielle's got some cool things because she's going to put in genetic markers into interventions, and that might be something new that could take us to another level. But in general, we're kind of doing similar things we've been doing for about the last 15 years with, changing it up, making it slicker and so on. I'm making it slicker. That's what I'm going to show you about. We'll see. But I think I'm also going to hopefully try to get one of these improvement spikes going with our next big project. So this is just, this is what, have we plateaued? This is a study, a big study that I was part of, and I'm first author on this paper. It's JCCP, a grant I had with Mary Larimer at the University of Washington. We took thousands of students. Now, don't even look at this slide, but just look at how crazy this is. That's all I want you to know. We took thousands of students. We put them into 11 different conditions and gave them feedback based on the specificity of their gender, their race, and there were 3 types of, and Greek, whether they were a Greek or not. So we had all these different levels of the type of specificity of the norm, right? So it could be you only got norms for the typical male. Or it could be you got a norm for the typical, if you were in a fraternity, the typical guy in a frat who's white. So you could get the different levels of specificity. Anyways, we pumped this in, we gave them all the feedback, we tracked them for a year, and what did we find? Basically, not much. We found that, it got me a JCCP, which is the gold standard publication, but that's about it. But what we found basically is that online basics, which is a kind of a treatment of choice in the college prevention world, did basically as well as PNF. PNF is briefer and shorter, so PNF did a little bit better, so they're about the same though. And we found that there was modest reductions, like I said, smallish effects, but there were reductions in drinking over time for people who had the intervention. And we found that the more specificity doesn't really improve it at all. Often it's better to have the typical student norm did just as well or better compared to the other levels of specificity. Typical same gendered student. So you want to give a female norms for females and a male norms for males. But that was kind of the big findings that we had. So have we reached a plateau? Well, I said we kind of have. But I think one of the reasons why we have is what I like to call the Einstellung Effect, which is basically this. Once you have a solution to something, you can be blind to other ones. And I think within the college student literature, we've developed this idea of multi-component or personalized normative feedback, and that this is really powerful and it's effective. And so we haven't been able to think outside the box in a lot of ways around this. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was about 10 years ago, I got involved in clicker interventions. The same time Linda Hancock, if some of you know Linda, she and I think I got my grant before her, but she's a big proponent of this as well. We both were parallel paths without ever really talking to each other, doing the similar thing. So great minds think alike, because Linda's an amazing person who really helped the field grow, particularly in the college prevention student life place. She's been a proponent of that for years. I think she just retired, so it's really a shame, a big loss for VCU, I'm sure. Anyway, so we took what we called brief, live, interactive, normative feedback interventions. We went into whole groups like this, and we gave them clickers, and we asked them to, because we felt like this would get at the believability of the norms thing. If they saw everyone who was giving the norms, where the norms are being derived from, they couldn't really discount them. And if the norms came from an intact group, like their dorm floor, or their fraternity or sorority, or so on, that it would be much more difficult to discount. So basically, we did this with, and these are the studies that we've did this a lot, but these are the studies that we actually published. We did it with 800 first-year students, 555 Greek students, 525 student athletes across 3 different universities, and 20 student groups. And so basically, what we found is that we gave them a baseline assessment. Then when they came into a live norms session where they got the clicker, we asked them, how much do you think everybody in this group drinks on a typical weekend? Then we asked them, how much do you drink on a typical weekend? Then we asked them, and basically we did not show them the results right away. And then after we asked all the questions, we showed them the results. And it was this big, I'll never forget the first time I did it with college women student athletes. Because when I asked them, how much do you think everybody's drinking, how often, they thought everybody was drinking and all the time. And then when I asked them, how much are you drinking, very few of them were drinking at all. And so, and when we showed the slides, first, here's what you think everybody said, and then we showed them, here's what everybody's doing, there was this big aha movement in an auditorium like this with all the college women, and they were all like, I thought I was the only one who was following the rules, or I thought I was the only one. Because again, what stood out was the woman athlete who ended up getting written up or got drunk or got kicked off her team, and so that made everybody think everybody was doing it. So that's kind of and so basically these interventions, with first-year students, fraternity members, athletes, the norms were reduced, so they reduced the actual thoughts they had about what their group was drinking, and then the behavior was reduced at 2 different follow-up points, and it worked for all different types, these in-person, live interventions. And Linda's an expert at these here. I think she did thousands of them, and I'm sure she would agree with me that these work. These are effective. So the advantage is, what makes this effective is the students all sit in the same room and generate the norms together live. Rather than national or campus-wide data, the results are specific to a group, and the stats are immediately displayed. So that's a very cool thing. Then we thought, well, let's take this to parents. So for years, I was doing the parent orientations at LMU, and we get about this many parents in a room. We give them clickers, and we do the similar type of thing, but because parents basically have misperceptions in 3 different areas. Parents misperceive how much their own kid drinks. They think, oh, other college kids are drinking a lot, but not my kid. My kid is well-behaved, totally. They also have misperceptions about communication. They think other parents are talking about alcohol less than they actually are. And then they have misperceptions about approval levels. So they think other parents are more approving of drinking than what the group of parents actually typically are. And why is that? Again, it's that what stands out. What stands out is your kid's friend's parent who allows them to drink in the backyard, or who lets them, or who is approving them, or who is drinking with them at the tailgate, or whatever it might be. That's what stands out as opposed to. So we did live parent sessions. These are some real slides. So what is the maximum number of drinks a typical LMU female student will consume? So you can see that well over 50% think 3 or more, and close to like 50% think 4 or more is the maximum number a typical female will consume. These are parents of incoming freshman women in June before they go to college. And then we asked them, how about your daughter? How much will she drink? Oh, no, she's not going to drink at all, 60%, 2 or less, So, and so then we say, well, look, might you be underestimating and then we give them the actual real norm for student drinking on our campus, and might you be underestimating your own daughter? How many drinks per week does a typical LMU parent think it's acceptable for their freshman son to consume? Well, look at this. I mean, if you look over here, you've got basically quite a few thinking 4 or more drinks are okay for their freshman son to consume. Then we ask them, what about you? How many drinks should your son consume? How many drinks is it okay for you? Oh. I mean, I'm not, so you see there's these misperceptions built in, and you show parents this, they get this aha moment, but then you have to give them the skills to have the right kinds of conversations, et cetera, with their students. So parents, I told you about the overestimations, what we did. We did these surveys in June. The parents were randomized to either come to one of our sessions or go to a control session where they heard about IT at the university. And then 4 months later, 1 month into college, we measured their students drinking before the parents came to orientation. We enrolled the students in the study. Then we measured it a month later after they got to college, and we also measured it 6 months later. Well, 4 months later, we had an 86% follow-up rate of the students, and basically, we reduced drinking in students at 1 month. So the students whose parents were in these sessions 4 months before they got to college, or 3 months before they got to college, drank less than the students whose parents weren't in these sessions. And secondly, we stopped students from initiating alcohol use if they hadn't already started 6 months into college. So if they hadn't already started, those whose parents were in this group 3 months before college, at the end of their first year, if they hadn't initiated, they were less likely to initiate than students whose parents weren't in this intervention. So as I say to parents, you really still have a great influence on your college son or daughter's drinking. It might not be as powerful as the descriptive norms of the group, the peer influence, but it is a powerful influence. And it's all about, somehow trying to stay true to your own values and not being influenced by what you think other parents are doing or what you think other kids are doing, but having the right kinds of conversations about the values you want for your son or daughter. So again, we talked about the 4 big issues. I want to just see where we got some time. So I'm going to run through. The issues solve some problems, but they have some problems themselves. The biggest problem with them, they're costly. You have to get the groups intact, and so on. So we've tried to take this online. We tried to take this concept online, then we tried to add things to it. We've tried to gamify our normative interventions. We've tried to make them more gamified, use techniques and elements from the gamified literature to deal with these interventions. And we tried to do it in a way that takes in this live experience that we had with the clickers. So we try to use this idea of co-presence, which is a social media-inspired visual representation of the peers that are also participating in the study and from whom the norms are being derived from. And then we have some chance-based uncertainty so that there's some randomness. This is supposed to do away with reactants. So this idea of like, you may or may not get feedback on alcohol. You may get feedback on something else. So this isn't geared to be an alcohol intervention necessarily. And then a point system, much like we heard about with the WE program earlier this morning. So again, that's part of a gamified study. So we've tried to test out some of these elements with respect to PNF, and then we've tried to put it all together. And I'm going to briefly walk through this. But so we basically wanted to give people head-to-head this kind of gamified element versus the typical survey. So this is typically what a PNF data set would look like, or an intervention would look like. You would say, you thought other female freshmen had 8 drinks on the occasion they drank the most. In real life, other female freshmen had only 3 drinks on the day they drank the most. And you had 6 drinks on the day you drank the most. Other female freshmen only had 3 drinks on the day they drank the most. So those are all the same things. But in the online social game, what we do is we say, we're matching you with other students like you, and we show them this co-presence thing before they get their feedback. So they get to see thumbnail photos of the other people that are actually involved in deriving the norms. So it's kind of like creating that you're in a group, live, deriving the norms together. And so when we did that with students and randomized them to either gamified feedback delivery or standardized feedback delivery, we actually got greater reductions in drinking with the gamified version. So just adding this co-presence feature, this kind of live feature, gets better reductions in drinking. Again, like I said, standard normative feedback reduces drinking, but the effects have been small. we need to do things to make them bigger. So this is one of the things we've done. Another thing we've done is this social perception test, which we took some binge drinkers. Remember, they were randomized to one of 4 conditions, ostensibly differing in the level of chance that was involved in the kind of feedback they got. So in the first condition, there was no chance. They just got standard PNF feedback, just typical PNF feedback. In the minimal chance, the questions about alcohol were selected by chance. We had a spinner with different topics, and it landed on alcohol. But the feedback was just on what you got your spinner on, which was alcohol. In the double chance, the questions, there were about 3 topics. The 3 topics were selected by chance. And then that was followed by PNF on alcohol, which was also selected by chance. So and the third one, you got 3 topics selected by chance, and then feedback on 2 topics selected by chance. You see what we're doing? We're trying to make it not be about alcohol. We're trying to reduce reactance, because we're trying to reduce defensiveness. We're trying to reduce that idea that, oh, you're trying to change my drinking, but my drinking is not a problem. We're trying to reduce that in students. And so here's kind of what it looks like selecting the topics. This is where it's selected topics to ask them questions about, selecting feedback models. And what we found is that basically the more chance you build in, more topics that you ask questions about, and 2 topics to get feedback about versus 1 just on alcohol, the more chance, the less reactance there is. If you look, the reactance is on the left hand on top. So you can see there's a lot more reactance on this bottom one with no spinners, as opposed to as you go up to the double spinner, double PNF, there's a lot less reactance there. So there's less reactance to the data. We asked them after the study, how much did you believe the data that you were given? So they believed it more if there was chance built in. And then if you look at the reductions in drinking, the reductions in drinking were more. More than almost 1.5 drinks per week in the double chance. And basically the change in drinking was mediated through the less reactance. That's a little bit more complicated analysis. So basically, and then we have one last one that we've just finished doing, which is different levels of co-presence. So at different levels of co-presence where you don't see at all no representation of your peers. Again, it's gamified, but no representation of your peers. Gamified with visual thumbnail sketches that come in. And then finally, there's not only thumbnail sketches, but there's a little bit of data about what their age is, what their major is, et cetera. If we do that, what we find is, again, the more co-presence there is, the less drinks they have, the greater the reductions they have in drinking. So these studies taken together show us that if you gamify things and you add co-presence and more co-presence, if you reduce reactance by adding chance, then you're able to get larger reductions than you would get with just standard PNF, which everybody's doing. Everybody out there is doing standard PNF right now. So then we did this real-world test, and I just want to show you. This is, and now we're about to get a big 5-year project started up with this, where we're testing it across several universities. But this was our pilot. So in the pilot, we call it Campus Gander, and the Gander has an acronym that's changed several times. So gamified alcohol norms and drinking reductions, or gamified something like that. So unpacking Gander. So it's delivering PNF in the context of a social media-inspired game for college students. I'm just going to show you some of the slides. This, by the way, I believe really does solve the 4 big limitations, or it goes a long way to solving the big limitations for why the effects for social norms in general have been relatively small. One is that students don't realize the game is designed to change alcohol. It's a game. It's a game about college life. It's what you want to do. Secondly, the statistics are from their real classmates, so they get to see their images and so forth, and the co-presence thing. And participation is voluntary. Students choose the questions themselves. So autonomy, students get to choose the questions themselves often, and I'll show you how that works right now. So here's kind of, this is what it looked like in our pilot. This is, we had this kind of, it wasn't an app, but it was a web-based smartphone kind of delivery mechanism. So they created a profile. They uploaded a profile picture. Again, they do all informed consent. They know that the picture, they know nobody's going to see their actual data, all that kind of stuff. So all this is good. So then when you're giving them results at the end of a week, what happens is this kind of loads. All the people that are playing the game load so that they can see who's playing the game. So that's kind of what happens when they're loading that. So the question for this week, this is the feedback. So each week there's a question period where we have it open and they can go in and answer the questions. And then at the end of the week, they get feedback. So I'm just going to run you through this. How many drinks did the typical female freshman have over the weekend? That was the question. View the results. Your guess was 7. The real average of all the female women that were playing the game is 2. And then how you compare. And then it gives them some data. So it shows her how she compares vis-a-vis the other women playing the game. And then based on your answer of 8 weekend drinks, then there was a judging component, a reflective judging component. We're going to change the wording on that. But so the men went in and they voted on whether a female who has 8 drinks a week is attractive, unattractive, hot mess, or together. These were kind of pilot tested or focus group tested terms. We're changing them for the big grant study, but this is what we used in the pilot. This comes out of my work about reflective norms that shows that another predictor of how much a student drinks over and above their descriptive norms of what they think their typical same-sex student drinks is how much they think the opposite sex wants them to drink. So, and so this is true both for men and women. The effect is higher for women. In fact, when this paper came out, it was APA chose it as their paper of the month, and they put out a press release and so on. I didn't even realize it. And then there were a lot of articles written on it based on the press release. And in the London Tablet, the title of the article was "Boozy Babes, a Turnoff for Blokes," which had nothing to do with the research. But, and that just goes to show you when you read research that's out there in the common press, it often has nothing to do with the actual study that you did. And of course, if you were interviewed, you would make it way more nuanced than what you see. But in any event, there was a judging component, and then there was answer this week's questions. So they get to answer the questions. There are 2 of them. How many times has a typical LMU female freshman locked herself out of her building or dorm room this semester so far? How many times have you locked yourself out? And then so then they can judge. So they say, what do you think about a male student who's locked himself out of his building 3 times a semester? So there's different types of questions that they get. They're not just all about drinking. I wanted to show you an example of that. And then how many times have you skipped a class because you didn't feel like it? So, and where do these questions come from? Students get to put them in. And then what questions they want to know about their peers. So submit your own question and make some money or some GAN dollars, so much like the WE dollars. So how many clubs and organizations has a typical freshman join this year? That's a question that Kayla's submitting. And so we get questions all the time. And then we go through them, and we have people vote on them as to which questions they want to know most about. So how many Uber rides have you taken since you got here? How many times, one of the questions that we asked, because they wanted to know it, and they voted it in, how many showers a week do you take? And how many hours a day do you study? But in general, 30 to 40% of the questions they put in are about partying, drinking, or drug use. So even if you just let them generate the questions, they want to know about that in their peers. They want to know what their peers are doing. So this is a chance for them to get their questions answered about their peers, have their norms kind of be corrected, and then move forward. So that's their week. And then doing this, we had a control group. We had a group that got alcohol PNF only. And then we had a group that had alcohol PNF plus that judging component. And as you can see, basically the those who were at the beginning, everybody was drinking the same, basically. And then at the end of the first semester, the people of the people who played the game, those who got the alcohol feedback and also the judging component were drinking quite a bit less than were the other students that were playing the game but didn't get any alcohol feedback. So students were randomized to either get alcohol feedback at some point through the semester or not to get it. And then if they were in the feedback, they were also randomized to get either that judging component where you're basically get feedback on what people of the opposite sex think about the behavior that you've reported and so forth. So anyways, students loved it. We put in a big 5-year grant for it, which is just about to get funded hopefully this week. Thumbs up. And then these are some of the comments they said. It tells you the opinions of other students. I like seeing how I compare to others. I'm gaining understanding of the social dynamics on my campus. I'm getting real statistics about other students that are relevant for college life. So you see there's a hunger out there for young people as they transition from high school into a new environment in college to know what everybody's doing. And what happens is if there's not accurate data about what everybody's doing, they tend to overestimate the unhealthy stuff, and that leads them to much more unhealthy behavior. So this potentially has the possibility of being able to manage that. What did you like the least? I wish it had been more ongoing and lasted the whole year. We got lots of those comments. So they really liked the game. They didn't like the fact that it only lasted 8 weeks in the first semester. And the user interface was lacking, it glitches too much, I wish it was an actual app. All that's going to be changed in this new project that's multi-site over 5 years. We're going to have a really slick program. So anyways, my final thoughts. There's an increased importance of the work that all of you are doing. By our, I don't mean my lab, I mean you guys. There's this really increased importance, as you noted from the beginning where we talked about the consequences and the extreme drinking and the change qualitatively in the type of drinking that's happening on college campuses. So that really increases the importance of the work that all of you are doing. And so I really want to applaud you for not only coming to this day, but for the hard work you do on a daily basis. It's really important work. Every time I see the faces of those kids, particularly those 3 that I showed you that have died this semester, I just think it's amazing how alcohol and drugs can snuff out lives. And not just lives that are lost in a second, but lives that are lost over 30 years and so forth. So this is really, really important work. It's time for a revolution in the way we do prevention and intervention, particularly with college students. But I think in general, we've been working at this hard for a long time, and we've been getting good results, but the effects are small. We need something new. We need to try new and novel creative things. Unfortunately, the way research works is we try to do things incrementally so often, and so but we need people like you to be innovative and to teach us new. I mean, all my good ideas I've got from 20-year-olds. The last 10 years of my career, it's been these super smart kids that I either taught or volunteered to work in my lab, and then I hired full-time. These ideas are really derived from them. So I'm not that innovative. We need to be more innovative. Promising new initiatives need to be tried, and ultimately be creative. Be creative in what you're doing, because this is really something where we need to have a huge impact. We need to make our impact stronger to really reduce all the costs associated with this in people's lives, for our healthcare systems, et cetera. Our college campuses, we've created this whole apparatus to deal with student mental health and substance use and so on that didn't exist 15 years ago. It's extremely expensive, and we still haven't really cracked the egg yet.